I bought this Bugatti Veyron for £900,000, but there's one big problem with it. It has a broken gearbox, which means it simply doesn't work. My car was split in two 4 years ago, and it's still not been resolved. So that means we're on our own. We're gonna have to fix this mess without Bugatti's help.
What does it take to bring a car back from the dead when the manufacturer won't help? 21 years ago, Mark set his sights on owning a Bugatti Veyron. £900,000 later, he finally got one, split clean in half.
I bought a broken Bugatti Veyron for £900,000, and today we're going to attempt to restore it back to its original condition.
Missing critical parts and turned away by Bugatti, who refused to sell a single component to fix it. What followed was 6 months of reverse engineering, almost everything by hand. Sensors, pumps, even a hand-built clutch nobody could be sure would actually work. The car moved again for the first time in years. But one final test was still waiting. Let's dive into the evidence and uncover the truth. The £900,000 gamble. Every obsession has a starting point, and this one traces back to 2005. That was the year Mark, a car enthusiast from Redditch, first laid eyes on a Bugatti Veyron in person. A car unlike anything that had come before it. A machine that seemed to bend the rules of what a road car could physically do. He didn't have anywhere near the money to buy one. What he had instead was a plan, and roughly 2 decades of patience. The climb toward that goal started small. His first car was a transit van, followed by a diesel Fiesta, then a Peugeot 106. Nothing that hinted at where this was heading. But by 23 years old, just 6 years after that van, he'd saved and worked enough, including side jobs driving grooms to their own weddings, to buy his first genuinely aspirational car, a Porsche 911 Targa. From there, the car collection kept climbing, several more Porsches, and by 2010, his first Lamborghini, a 2006 Gallardo, later swapped for a far more aggressive 2011 Aventador, a matte black V12 he described as looking like it had rolled straight off a Batman film set. Isn't it worth pausing on how deliberate this progression actually was? This wasn't impulsive spending. It was 2 decades of methodically working toward a single, specific goal, upgrading one car at a time, while the Veyron itself stayed just out of reach, its price climbing faster than his savings could close the gap. At its lowest point, around 2012, a Veyron could be found for roughly £650,000, a price Mark himself later admitted he wished he'd been able to act on at the time. He did manage to time one other purchase well. Alongside his father, he bought 2 Porsche Carrera GTs imported from America, while prices there had dropped to around £300,000 each, later selling them on for a solid profit. But the Veyron market moved in the opposite direction entirely. By the time he was seriously in a position to consider one, prices had climbed toward £1 million, and modern cars, in his own view, simply hadn't replicated the kind of engineering spectacle the Veyron represented. A big part of why demand, and price, kept climbing rather than fading with age. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A friend, Ollie, mentioned a Veyron that was far from perfect, but far cheaper than anything else on the market. When Mark and Ollie actually walked into that workshop, nothing could have prepared them for the state of the car. This wasn't a Veyron with a few cosmetic issues. It was, quite literally, split in half. Front and rear sections separated, mid-restoration, and abandoned.
The reason this car is in 2 halves is because it's got a gearbox problem. In the last video, we received it back, and finally, after 5 months, hopefully, it's fixed.
The car itself carried its own pedigree, which made the situation even more painful to witness. It had been converted by Mansory, the German tuning house known for extreme limited-run builds. This particular Veyron featured aluminum body panels, including a front bumper machined from a single solid block of metal, all hand-polished to an almost mirror-like finish enthusiasts call the shiny spoon look. It was a numbered, limited edition example, and it had covered only 8,000 miles in its entire life. For £900,000, Mark bought it anyway. What he was buying wasn't a working car. It was a mechanical puzzle with a badge attached that made every single missing piece exponentially harder to solve. Because the one advantage every other broken-down car owner has, calling the manufacturer for parts, simply didn't exist here. Bugatti would not sell so much as a single component for this car, at any price, for any reason. That refusal is the thread running through everything that follows. Every fix on this car had to come from somewhere other than the company that built it. Independent specialists, cross-referenced parts from entirely different manufacturers, and in some cases, pure reverse engineering from people who happened to have worked on the platform decades earlier. The restoration wasn't just a mechanical challenge. It was a 6-month exercise in solving problems the car's own maker had made deliberately unsolvable. The financial stakes only sharpened that pressure. By the time this restoration was underway, even the cheapest running Veyron available anywhere in the country carried a price tag north of £2 million, meaning every fix, however improvised, was being performed on an asset whose value could swing dramatically, depending on whether the car ultimately worked. Get it right, and Mark would own a numbered, Mansory-converted Veyron worth a fraction of what a comparable running example would cost. Get it wrong, and £900,000 would be sitting in a garage as an extremely expensive, extremely elaborate ornament. Saving a Veyron without Bugatti. With the car reassembled enough to run, the first problem was impossible to ignore. On cold starts, the engine sounded less like a hypercar and more, as Mark himself put it, like a tractor. A rough, burbling idle that smoothed out once the engine warmed. But for a car with this badge on the back, even a temporary rough patch was alarming. The good news was that this wasn't uncharted territory. Another Veyron owner, referred to throughout the project simply as Matt,
today we're about to attempt what Bugatti think is impossible,
had documented an almost identical cold start symptom on his own car. To confirm the diagnosis, the team did something refreshingly simple. They found a healthy, well-maintained Veyron at their specialist workshop, Furlonger, and ran a cold start on it for direct comparison. The difference was obvious immediately. A properly functioning Veyron simply didn't sound like this. Since Bugatti wasn't an option, the fix came from lateral thinking. Matt had already discovered that the Veyron's mass airflow sensors, the components that tell the engine's computer how much air is moving through the intake so it can calculate the correct fuel mixture, could be cross-referenced to an entirely different manufacturer's part number. Furlonger already had test units on hand from tackling this exact issue before. Swapped in, tested on a fresh cold start, and the fix worked immediately. One major problem solved without a single Bugatti part involved. The second mechanical issue was subtler, but arguably more important. The Veyron's transmission relies on an accumulator pump to build hydraulic pressure, which is then used to physically push the gear selectors into position. If that pump is weak or slow, the consequences cascade quickly. It can overheat and burn out, blow a fuse from that heat, or simply fail to generate enough pressure for the gearbox to select a gear at all. To measure the problem, the team benchmarked Mark's pump against a known good Veyron in storage at Furlonger, timing exactly how long it took to build full pressure. The healthy car's pump completed the cycle in 24 seconds. Mark's pump took noticeably longer, long enough that everyone in the garage immediately recognized it as a genuine fault, not a minor inefficiency. When the old pump was finally removed and opened up, the reason was obvious. It was corroded internally, the protective coating long gone. Isn't it telling that even a component sealed away inside a transmission wasn't safe from the years this car spent neglected? Because Bugatti's own replacement pump was both eye-wateringly expensive and, more importantly, discontinued entirely, Furlonger sourced an improved aftermarket unit instead. One that, according to the specialists fitting it, actually outperformed the original Bugatti design. Once installed, the new pump built pressure in roughly the same time as the well-maintained comparison cars the team had tested. Another win, and another problem solved entirely outside of Bugatti's own supply chain. 2 mechanical fires put out. But the car's real make-or-break issue, the one nobody could fully solve with a spare part, no matter where it came from, was still ahead. The Veyron finally moved again. If the sensor and pump problems were solvable with clever sourcing, the Veyron's clutch was a different category of challenge entirely, because the original friction material simply wasn't available to buy from anyone, at any price. The team's solution was almost unthinkable for a car this exotic. Build replacement clutch friction plates from scratch, guessing at the correct material composition. This is where the story takes an almost cinematic turn. So the 2 specialists brought in to evaluate the homemade clutch plates, Rob and Andrew, weren't random transmission experts. Decades earlier, working for Ricardo, they had personally written the original software and every mechanical characteristic for this exact Veyron gearbox when the platform was first being developed. If anyone alive could judge whether a hand-built clutch would actually behave like the real thing, it was these 2. Their verdict, after testing the plates on a rig, was cautiously optimistic, but far from certain. The kiss point, the exact point where the clutch begins transferring drive and the car starts to creep forward, measured slightly above the expected range, but still within acceptable limits. The bigger concern was something that couldn't be tested on a stationary rig at all: how the material would behave once actually loaded with real revs and torque, out on the road. Every clutch has what engineers describe as a gain curve, a predictable relationship between how much pressure is applied and how much torque the clutch can actually transmit. And every plate built to the original specification would fall within a tight, well-understood tolerance around that curve. A hand-built, best-guess material had no such guarantee. If the plates performed outside their expected parameters under that kind of load, the result would be clutch slip, and the only way to know for certain was to actually drive the car. While that uncertainty hung over the project, the car's bodywork told its own restoration story. Years of neglect had left the aluminum panels badly oxidized, the metal equivalent of rust, turning the once mirror-polished surface dull and blotchy, along with dents in every wheel arch, plus a mysterious dent that looked suspiciously like a supermarket trolley had rolled into it at some point in the car's history. The man given this job, Bob, wasn't a traditional bodywork specialist. His background was building aluminum fuel tanks for motorbikes, working with nearly identical material and comparable curved surfaces, just at a smaller scale. His method for the worst dents looked almost destructive before it looked like a fix, heating the damaged section until it could be carefully hammered from behind, then welding, then grinding, then polishing, repeatedly, for 2 straight weeks, until the dents disappeared and the mirror finish returned. Alongside that painstaking panel work, a separate specialist team used pressurized ice crystals to strip away years of accumulated dust and grime from the surrounding cars in storage, a process that converts directly from solid to gas on impact, rather than melting into liquid, lifting dirt away without ever risking scratching the delicate polished surface underneath. The rear spoiler carried its own standalone electronic mystery. Stuck permanently in the down position, it created two serious problems. With the wing down, there was nowhere for exhaust heat to safely vent, and several rear panels physically couldn't be reinstalled with the spoiler in that position. The culprit turned out to be a discontinued linear position sensor, a component supplied by a manufacturer contracted to sell exclusively to Bugatti, making it completely unobtainable through any normal channel. The workaround the team devised was almost mischievous in its simplicity.
We don't know the materials, we don't know the sizes, the tolerances, or even the specs. We just have a team of great engineers using their previous experience to manufacture what we hope is right.
Because the sensor used an external magnet to track the spoiler's position electronically, the team strapped an additional magnet onto the assembly from outside, tricking the car's computer into reading a position above the sensor's known dead zone, the range where it had been throwing a fault. Once the spoiler reached its fully raised position, they physically locked it in place and removed the magnet and sensor connection entirely. The system now believed, permanently, that everything was functioning normally. It wasn't elegant, but it worked, and it meant the team could finally close up the back of the car, putting it back together. With the major mechanical fires contained, the project shifted into the long, unglamorous work of reassembly, the kind of labor that rarely makes for dramatic footage, but determines whether everything holds together once the car is actually driven. The interior needed its own kind of restoration. 20-year-old leather seats had gone baggy and creased, so specialist Max spent hours heating and gently massaging the material back into shape. Not a full restoration to factory condition, but a significant improvement, with the team acknowledging that some remaining wear was simply the honest character of a 2-decade-old interior rather than something worth an expensive retrim. Elsewhere, Mark discovered a missing section of interior carpet and, in a rare hands-on moment for the owner himself, attempted to fabricate a replacement from cardboard. A repair that went about as well as an improvised cardboard template usually does, template errors and all. Small fasteners caused disproportionately large headaches throughout the project. A specific structural nut, connecting the front and rear sections of the chassis, an engine mount bolt, and a temporary hydraulic pipe repair, all fell into the same familiar pattern. Parts Bugatti flatly refused to supply, eventually sourced instead through Furlonger's own network. The temporary hydraulic pipe fix, in particular, became something of a running joke on the project. Installed as a stopgap, expected to need revisiting, and instead holding completely leak-free for weeks on end. Then came the moment the entire project had been building toward, at least symbolically, the car moving under its own power. It was only a few feet, forward and then backward, nothing close to a real drive. But after everything the car had been through, split in half, stripped of working components, rebuilt from parts nobody was supposed to be able to source, watching it move on its own hydraulics for the first time in years was, by any measure, a genuine milestone. None of this restoration would have been financially or logistically possible without the audience watching it unfold. Mark's presence on YouTube traces back to 2022, when a chance conversation on the set of a BBC production, where he was teaching a driving segment, introduced him to someone who pulled him into content creation almost by accident. 4 years later, That channel had grown to 1 million subscribers, and just as importantly, into a genuine international network of specialists, from transmission engineers to independent parts suppliers, all willing to dig into a problem most workshops would have simply turned away. Several of the fixes on this exact car, whatever happened afterward, that alone represented a genuine engineering achievement, built almost entirely without the cooperation of the company whose name was on the hood. But rolling a few feet across a workshop floor and surviving an actual road test are two very different tests. And the one component nobody could fully verify without real driving conditions, that hand-built clutch, was about to face the only test that actually mattered. When everything went wrong. The first phase of testing was deliberately cautious, with the rear wing temporarily taken off to avoid risking the freshly repaired carbon fiber. One of the original transmission engineers, Rob, took the controls first. Someone with direct experience of exactly what a healthy version of this specific gearbox should feel like, engaging reverse and drive while listening closely to engine load, response time, and any hint of shudder through the clutch. The results were genuinely encouraging. The engine held steady rather than dipping unexpectedly when reverse engaged. The car crept forward smoothly the instant the brake was released, and critically, none of the telltale vibration of a poorly matched clutch, a condition engineers call geometric oscillation, was present at all. For a component nobody could be entirely certain about until this exact moment, it was about as reassuring a start as anyone could have hoped for. Encouraged by that low-speed test, the team moved to the real trial, a proper road test, with the rear tray plates back on, and two people this time, Chris and Rob, taking the car out of the workshop yard, while Mark, unable to fit in the two-seat cabin with them, watched from a distance. Within seconds of leaving the yard, though, both men inside the car could tell something was wrong. The throttle response felt slippery, disconnected, nothing like the smooth, low-speed creep test only minutes earlier. That's exactly the failure mode the clutch specialists had warned might happen. Under real revs and load, the exact condition impossible to fully simulate on a stationary rig, the hand-built friction plates began slipping, unable to fully transfer engine power to the wheels.
Naturally aspirated, direct injected, 6.2-liter aluminum V8 engine.
An engine warning light appeared, limiting power output as a protective measure. As if to underline just how much could still go wrong on this car, a second, unrelated fault appeared almost simultaneously. The doors locked shut and wouldn't open, forcing the team to bring out a step stool just to get everyone out of the car safely. Isn't it almost cruelly fitting that a project defined by problems compounding on top of each other would end this particular test the exact same way? The road test was aborted within minutes of leaving the yard. Back at the workshop, the specialists talked through exactly what they'd felt and heard. The engine needing far more revs than normal just to keep the car moving. The sensation of the clutch cooling system kicking in aggressively during periods of high slip. All of it consistent with a friction material that simply couldn't hold up once asked to do real work, rather than creep gently across a flat yard. The diagnosis, once everyone regrouped, was as straightforward as it was disappointing. The hand-guessed clutch material didn't hold up under genuine driving load, which meant the most likely fix was pulling the gearbox back out and splitting the car apart again, undoing a significant portion of 6 months of work. For a man who had spent 21 years wanting this exact car, watching that specific fear play out in real time was clearly difficult to absorb. And yet, buried inside the disappointment was the same theme that had defined the entire restoration from the very beginning. A manufacturer unwilling to help, and a team of independent specialists left to solve an almost impossible problem with nothing but reverse engineering, borrowed expertise, and persistence. Every previous setback on this project, the misfire, the failing pump, the locked spoiler, had eventually given way to a workaround nobody could have sourced through official channels. There was no obvious reason to assume the clutch would be any different, even if this particular fix would clearly take longer and cost more than anyone on the team had hoped going into that test drive. What began as a dream nearly 20 years in the making became one of the most ambitious Bugatti restoration projects ever attempted. From buying a Veyron split in half to overcoming impossible mechanical failures without factory support, every challenge tested the limits of engineering, patience, and determination. Even when the final road test ended in disappointment, the project proved that innovation often comes from those willing to solve problems others consider impossible. The journey isn't over, and the biggest breakthrough may still lie ahead. What would you have done in Mark's position? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible automotive stories.